I am Owen McKinley. I am 70 years old, and I have learned that the cruelest betrayals always come from those you love the most. I arrived at my son's house on Thanksgiving Day without warning. I'd driven the 3 hours from my small apartment in the city, anticipating a warm meal, maybe even a genuine smile. Instead, I found my grandson Leo shivering on the frozen front lawn. He is 10 years old. He was wearing only a thin t-shirt and shorts. My car thermometer read 15 degrees Fahrenheit. I looked through the bay window. The dining room was glowing. My son Patrick and my daughter-in-law Sabrina were seated at the head of a long table surrounded by food. A massive golden brown turkey sat in the center. They were raising their glasses, laughing with friends. They hadn't seen me, and they clearly weren't missing Leo. I didn't knock. I kicked the front door open. The heavy oak slammed against the interior wall. The music stopped. The laughter died. Patrick and Sabrina spun around their faces, a mask of shock. I stood in the doorway, the freezing wind whipping past me into their warm, perfect room. I looked straight at my son and said the 6 words I had held back for years. "The party is over. Get out." Their faces went white. I stood there in the threshold, letting the bitter cold pour in. Sabrina was the first to find her voice. Her shock dissolved instantly into that familiar venomous rage I knew so well. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Owen?" she shrieked. She always called me Owen, never Dad. It was a calculated little barb of disrespect she'd used since they met, a way to remind me I was an outsider. "Are you senile? You're ruining Thanksgiving. Get out of my house." I ignored her. Her insults were like gnats, annoying but harmless. I walked past her, my old worn-out work boots, the ones I'd had for 10 years, the ones she always made fun of, clicking on their expensive hardwood floors. I walked straight to the gleaming stainless steel oven, a model that cost more than my entire supposed monthly pension. The aroma of roasting turkey and sage filled the air. I reached out and twisted the knob. Click. The gas flame died. Patrick scrambled to his feet, knocking his chair over with a loud scrape. "Dad! Dad, what? Why did you turn that off?" he stammered. I turned slowly, but my eyes didn't meet his. I looked past him, through him, toward the dark window. "Where is Leo?" I interrupted. My voice was as cold as the air outside. Patrick flinched. He shot a quick, desperate glance at Sabrina, the look of a trained dog seeking permission from its master. It was a look I had seen 1,000 times, and it made my stomach turn. He's in his room, Dad," Patrick lied, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. "He's grounded. He was disrespectful." "Grounded," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You lie." I pointed a steady finger toward the front door I had left open. "It's 15 degrees out there. He is on the lawn freezing to death, in shorts." The silence was thick. Sabrina scoffed a short, ugly sound as she took a defiant sip of her $90 wine. "He'll live," she said, dabbing her painted lips with a cloth napkin. "He needs a lesson." He deliberately spilled cranberry sauce on my new dress. She looked down at the silk fabric, as if it were a wounded child. "He has to learn his place in this house." His place. Those words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. This wasn't the first time. I knew Sabrina hated Leo. I'd known it from the day Patrick introduced her, just 6 short months after his first wife, Emily, had passed. Leo was the living, breathing legacy of Emily, a wonderful, kind woman who had fought breast cancer for 3 long years. Sabrina saw Leo as a burden, a ghost at the feast, a constant reminder of the woman she could never be. And me, in their eyes, I was just the poor relation. The retired old man living on a meager pension, tucked away in a tiny rent-controlled apartment 3 hours away. A harmless fool they could pity at holidays to make themselves feel generous. At least that's what they thought. I didn't waste another word on them. Logic is wasted on the cruel. I walked back to the open front door. Leo wasn't on the lawn anymore. He had dragged himself behind an azalea bush near the porch, trying to find shelter from the wind. He was curled into a tight ball, his arms wrapped around his knees, his entire body shaking in violent, uncontrollable spasms. His lips were a terrifying shade of blue. "Grandpa," he whispered, his teeth chattering too hard to form the word properly. "It's okay, Leo." My voice broke. "It's all right. Grandpa's here." I stripped off my heavy wool coat, the 40-year-old coat Sabrina always said smelled like old man and mothballs, and wrapped it tightly around his small, trembling frame. I lifted him. He weighed almost nothing. A 10-year-old boy who felt like he was made of paper and ice. I carried him back inside past the stunned faces at the dining table. "What do you think you're doing with him?" Patrick yelled. It wasn't the voice of a concerned father. It was the voice of a man whose authority was being challenged in front of his wife, a man terrified of the consequences. I ignored him. I carried Leo straight to the fireplace and sat him down on the expensive leather armchair, Emily's favorite chair, the one her mother had given them, the one Sabrina always refused to sit in. I grabbed a cashmere throw blanket from the sofa, a gift I had given them last Christmas, which Sabrina had probably hated, and wrapped it around him over my coat. "I'm doing what a father should be doing," I said, rubbing his arms and legs, trying to force life back into them. Patrick knew nothing about me. Not really. My wife Clara passed away 15 years ago. She was my anchor. She was the one who managed Patrick, who saw his weaknesses but loved him anyway. She always wanted him to be self-sufficient. But Patrick was a profound disappointment. He couldn't hold a job. He was lazy, weak-willed, and full of big ideas that amounted to nothing but debt I had secretly paid off for a decade. Then he married Sabrina. I saw her for exactly what she was in the first 5 minutes, a calculating, ruthless gold digger. The irony was she thought I was the poor one. She had no idea that my tiny apartment was a conscious choice to escape the shallow world she worshipped. She had no idea that my meager pension was actually the monthly interest payment from a diversified portfolio managed by McKinley Holdings, the real estate and construction empire I built from nothing and sold for a 9-figure sum 5 years ago. I was retired, yes, but I was retired as one of the wealthiest men in the state. I just didn't see the point in advertising it. I turned to go to this kitchen to get Leo some warm water. Sabrina stepped in front of me, blocking my path. Her face was red with fury. "You have no right," she hissed. "This is our house. You are a guest. An uninvited, senile old guest. Now you take that brat and you get out." I stopped. I looked at her standing there in her $1,000 dress, a dress I had indirectly paid for. "Are you sure this is your house, Sabrina?" I pulled out my phone. It was an old-school flip phone. They laughed at this too, but it only had one number on speed dial. "Ben." "Ben," I said into the phone as it connected. "Ben Carter. My lawyer for 30 years and the only man alive who knew the full truth." "It's Owen. Activate the Thanksgiving package." "Yes, immediately." I snapped the phone shut. "Activate what?" Sabrina sneered. "The emergency medical services, you finally calling the nursing home to book your own room." Patrick, seeing my old phone, regained a sliver of confidence. He stepped forward, trying to play the reasonable son. "Dad, look, you're overreacting. It's just a small punishment. It got out of hand. Now why don't you put Leo in his room and we can all sit down and talk about this over dinner? Sabrina made your favorite pumpkin pie." Pumpkin pie. As if a dessert could erase the image of my grandson turning blue in the snow. As if it could undo years of parasitic living and calculated cruelty. I looked straight at my son, the man-child I had enabled for far too long. "Patrick," I said, my voice cutting through the room. "You have 10 minutes. Get your wife. Get your personal toiletries. Get any clothes you bought with your own money if you can find any. And get out of my house, now." Patrick stared at me, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. But, Dad, what are you talking about? The party is over. Get out! Sabrina exploded. A high-pitched, hysterical laugh filled the room. You're insane, she shrieked. You're completely senile. You think you can just, kick us out of our own house? She turned to Patrick, grabbing his arm. Patrick, do something. Call the police, tell them your crazy old father is having an episode. I can, I said. The calm in my own voice surprised me. I can kick you out, because my name, and only my name, is on the deed to this house. You, I pointed at Patrick, and you, I pointed at Sabrina, have been living here rent-free for 5 years. You are tenants, and your lease just expired. The room fell dead silent. The only sound was the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Sabrina's laughter died in her throat. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, turned a pale, sickly white. What did you say? She whipped around to face Patrick, tumming his expensive suit jacket. Patrick, he's lying, isn't he? Tell me he's lying. You told me you bought this house. You told me it was yours. Patrick couldn't speak. He just stared at the floor, his entire body trembling. He backed away from her step by step until his back hit the wall. He knew it was the truth. I bought this house 12 years ago, cash for Patrick and Emily when Leo was born. I wanted them to have a solid foundation, a place to build a life. But I was never a fool. I kept the deed in my name, held in a trust managed by McKinley Holdings. I told Patrick it was a complex rent-to-own agreement, a legal fiction to protect the asset while giving him a sense of ownership he clearly never deserved. When Emily passed and Sabrina slithered in 6 months later, I froze the trust indefinitely. I've been paying the property taxes. I've been paying the homeowner's insurance. I paid for the new roof last spring and the new boiler last winter. They haven't paid a single dime for this roof over their heads. They just lived in it, complaining that the decor was dated. Sabrina stared at Patrick, the full realization hitting her like a physical blow. You lied to me, she whispered, her voice shaking with a new kind of fury. You've been lying to me this whole time. Patrick's panic was a fragile thing lasting maybe 30 seconds. He looked at me, at the floor, at his wife, his mind visibly failing to compute the new reality. But Sabrina was different. She was a survivor. I watched her realize she had lost this round, and instead of collapsing, she immediately instinctively changed tactics. I saw her take a single deep breath. Her spine, which had been curved in shock, straightened. The mask of hysteria vanished, replaced by a chilling reptilian calm. She even smoothed the front of her designer dress, the one stained with cranberry sauce. Okay, she said. Her voice was no longer a shriek. It was low, sweet as honey, and cold as the grave. You win this round, Owen. And she walked over to Patrick, who was still slumped against the wall like a marionette with its strings cut. She didn't offer a hand. She yanked his arm. Get it together, Patrick. We're leaving. He stumbled forward, looking at her confused. Sabrina turned back to me, and she actually smiled. It was a thin, tight smile that didn't touch her eyes. You want this rundown house? She said, gesturing around the room I had paid to renovate last year. This museum, keep it. Frankly, you're doing us a favor. We were getting tired of it anyway. The plumbing is ancient and the decor is just sad. This was her new angle. Devalue what she had just lost. Pretend it was never wanted. Patrick and I don't need it, she continued, her voice rising just enough so the neighbors who were now shamelessly gathered on the sidewalk could hear her through the open door. We were only staying here to keep you company, Owen. Out of pity. Pity. That word again. The lie they had wrapped themselves in for years. Patrick, seeing his wife's new defiant confidence, began to straighten up. He latched onto her arrogance like a drowning man grabbing a piece of driftwood. She's... she's right, Dad, he said, his voice still shaky but attempting to find a note of firmness. We don't need this. We have our own life. A much better life. Sabrina smirked at me, believing she had regained control. We're going to a better place, she announced. We don't need your charity. We never did. This was the new conflict. They were doubling down on their fantasy of independent wealth. This was the lie they had told everyone, the lie they had perhaps even told themselves. They were setting the stage for their next performance. And I, being the only one in the audience who knew the truth, decided to let them build that stage a little higher before I pulled the lever to the trapdoor. She looped her arm through Patrick's, pulling him upright like a puppet whose strings had just been reattached. Let's go, darling, she cooed, her voice loud enough for the neighbors to hear clearly. We're going to a better place. We don't need this charity from this sad old man. Patrick, like a plant, turning toward its only source of light, absorbed her performance and tried to make it his own. He puffed out his chest, or at least he tried to. He looked at me, his eyes still holding a flicker of fear, but his words were pure Sabrina. She's right, Dad, he announced, his voice cracking only slightly. You think we needed this house, you think we're dependent on you. He let out a short, forced laugh. You're naive. You're so naive. He gestured around the room, not with the panic of a man who had just lost his home, but with the false bravado of a man pretending to discard something worthless. This was just temporary, a favor we were doing for you, keeping the old family home occupied so you wouldn't have to worry about squatters. I almost smiled. It was a pathetic last-ditch attempt to spin the narrative to seize back an ounce of dignity. You know nothing about our lives, Dad. He pressed on, gaining momentum as Sabrina nodded encouragingly. You sit in your dusty little apartment counting your pension checks. You have no idea what I do. You have no idea what we're worth. Oh, I see, I said, my voice quiet. I let them build their stage. I let them climb right up onto the gallows they were building for themselves. That's right, Sabrina chimed in, stepping forward again. You know nothing. You have no idea who my family is. You have no idea what my husband has built. This little house, she scoffed, this is nothing. This is pocket change for us. She was so confident in her lie, so utterly convinced that I was the poor, ignorant fool she had always believed me to be. She had no idea that I wasn't just the owner of this house. I was the silent, invisible architect of their entire fraudulent lifestyle. I watched them. Patrick standing there trying to look imposing. Sabrina with her chin up, defiant and arrogant. This was their performance, their well-rehearsed united front. Patrick had always boasted about his work. He was a freelance investment consultant. He'd tell me a title so vague it meant absolutely nothing. He spoke of clients and portfolios and market volatility using jargon he'd clearly picked up from movies. I, who had built a 9-figure empire from concrete and steel, would just nod, feigning ignorance while he explained the complexities of his imaginary job. And then there was Sabrina. She was the real masterpiece of fiction. She'd often speak of her family trust fund back in New York. My parents are very private, she'd say, but let's just say I'm comfortable. And she painted a picture of old money, of weekends in the Hamptons and boarding schools in Switzerland. Together they built a fortress of lies. They drove a brand new, top-of-the-line BMW 7 Series, a car that cost more than my entire apartment building. They took extravagant summer vacations to Europe, Paris, Rome, the Swiss Alps, posting hundreds of photos online, always with champagne in hand. They wore clothes that dripped with designer labels, and all the while they would look at me, Owen, the man in the old coat, the man who lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment in the city, with such profound, undisguised pity. Dad, you should really let us help you, Patrick would say, his voice full of false concern. You shouldn't be living in that place. Owen, it's just so sad, Sabrina would add. A man your age deserves some dignity. They saw my simplicity as failure, my frugality as poverty, my silence as weakness. They had no idea that their entire glittering lifestyle, the BMW, the trips to Europe, the designer clothes, even the food they were about to eat, was funded by the very man they pitied. They thought they were the powerful ones. They were about to learn what real power was. Sabrina, fueled by her own manufactured arrogance, took a step toward the fireplace. Her eyes weren't on me anymore, they were on Leo, who was finally starting to regain some color in his cheeks. "And we are taking the boy with us," she announced, as if declaring she was taking a piece of furniture. She lunged forward, her manicured fingers reaching for Leo's arm. "Get up! We're leaving!" Leo screamed. It wasn't a child's tantrum, it was a cry of pure terror. He scrambled off the chair and hid behind my legs, clinging to my trousers with all his might. I didn't move. I simply planted my feet and became a wall. I stood directly between my grandson and this woman. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her hysteria. "He stays with me." Sabrina stopped. She looked at my hand, which was now resting protectively on Leo's head. Then she looked at my face, and she laughed. "No," she mocked, her voice dripping with contempt. "No. What are you going to do about it, old man? Call your phantom lawyer again?" She jabbed a finger at Patrick, who was standing uselessly by the door. "Patrick is his father. He has custody. We are his family. You are nothing." She took another step, trying to circle around me to get to Leo. "You have no rights here. You're a penniless old fool who just got lucky pulling one last power trip with a house deed. But that's over now." I didn't flinch. I just moved slightly, blocking her again. "Patrick is his father," she repeated, her voice getting louder, shriller. "And we have money, real money. Do you understand what that means? It means we can and we will fight you. You can't win against us. You have nothing. You are nothing. We will drag you through court until you don't have a penny left for your pathetic little apartment. We will prove you're senile, unfit. And we will take that boy. You'll never see him again." The threat hung in the air, raw and brutal. She wasn't just trying to leave. She was trying to destroy me. She was threatening to take the only person left in my life that mattered. She was using the very weapon, money, that she believed I didn't have. It was the final fatal mistake. Patrick, seeing my momentary silence as weakness, seeing his wife's attack, finally found his footing. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and Sabrina, attempting to look protective. "Dad, you just don't get it, do you?" he said. His voice dripping with a condescending pity that was far more insulting than Sabrina's rage. "I didn't want to say this. I really didn't. But you've forced my hand. You've forced us to be honest about who we are." I just waited. The hook was set. Now it was time to let them run with the line. Sabrina seized the cue, her eyes glittering with malicious triumph. "He's right, Owen. You have no idea who you're talking to." She laughed, that same grating superior laugh from the dinner table. "You know what my husband does all day while you're, I don't know, collecting stamps in your sad little apartment?" She paused for dramatic effect, glancing at the watching neighbors, ensuring her audience was captivated. "He manages an investment fund," she announced, her voice booming with pride. "A $5 million fund. That's $5 million, Owen. 5. With 6 zeros. She practically spat the number at me as if the sound of it alone should make me wither. "This house," she scoffed. "You think we care about this house? We could buy 10 houses just like this, in cash. We could buy this whole mediocre street and turn it into a parking lot if we felt like it. We were staying here as a favor." She was on a roll now, the lies flowing effortlessly. "You kicking us out isn't a punishment," she sneered. "It's a liberation. You've just freed us, you old fool. Freed us from having to pretend we care about your dusty furniture and your outdated opinions. Freed us from having to phase you out of obligation. We can finally go and live our real lives." Patrick nodded beside her, his chest puffed out, fully inhabiting the role of the secret millionaire his wife had written for him. We were trying to be humble for you, Dad. We were trying not to make you feel bad about your situation, but you just couldn't accept our kindness." I looked at them. The desperate failed son and the venomous lying wife standing on my porch in front of my house threatening me with my own money. It was the most pathetic, tragic performance I had ever witnessed, and I was the only one who knew the truth. I let the number hang in the air for a moment. $5 million. It was an impressive figure, designed to crush me, to end the argument, to establish their unquestionable superiority. I looked at Patrick. I even allowed a small, impressed whistle to escape my lips. $5 million. I repeated slowly, as if the concept was too large for my simple mind to grasp. That's incredible, son. Truly, I had no idea. Patrick swelled with pride. He glanced at Sabrina, who was smiling triumphant. They thought they had won. They thought they had put the old man in his place. "It is," Patrick said, trying to sound modest but failing miserably. "It's a lot of responsibility, of course. The markets, they're complex." "I'm sure they are," I said, nodding. I turned my gaze to him, my expression one of pure, naive curiosity. "A $5 million fund. That's just astonishing. It must have a very impressive name. What do you call it, Patrick?" "This fund of yours." The question was simple, direct, and it was a landmine. Patrick froze. The confident facade wavered. I watched as his eyes darted nervously to the left, then to the right. He was searching. He hadn't prepared for this. Liars are often good at the big picture, but they crumble on the details. It's, he stammered. Sabrina, sensing his hesitation, jumped in. "It's a private fund, Owen. It's very exclusive. Not something you would just talk about." "Oh, I'm sure," I said, not taking my eyes off Patrick. "But it must have a name. For the letterhead. For the bank." "What is it, son?" Patrick's face was turning red. He was drowning. He looked at Sabrina, then fell at the BMW, then at the house, as if trying to draw inspiration from the very things I had given him. It's the McKinley," he started, grabbing at his own last name. "The McKinley Valor Fund. Yes, that's it. The McKinley Valor Fund. It's a private partnership." "McKinley Valor," I repeated, tasting the name. "How very strong. A very impressive name, Patrick." He nodded, relieved, thinking he had passed the test. Sabrina smiled again, her arrogance returning. They had no idea. They had no idea that McKinley was the one word he should never have used. They had just confidently walked straight into the trap I had laid. And now it was time to spring it. "McKinley Valor," I repeated. I let the name hang in the freezing air between us. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. He had chosen the one name, the one single word that sealed his fate. He had just admitted in front of his wife and the neighbors, who were now watching intently, that the fund was tied to me. "A very strong name," I said, my voice quiet. "It sounds official. It sounds powerful." "It is," Patrick said, puffing his chest out again, believing he had dodged the bullet. "It is," I agreed. "It's a very strong name, especially," I said, taking a step toward him, "when 100% of the capital in the McKinley Valor Fund came directly from me." The thin, arrogant smile on Sabrina's face froze. Patrick's eyes widened. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth, son. Something you and I haven't discussed in a long time." I looked him dead in the eye. "It's not an investment fund, Patrick. It never was. It's a revocable trust. A trust I established 15 years ago. A trust I funded. A trust I named McKinley Valor as a sort of private joke. McKinley for the family name and Valor for the quality I always hoped you would one day find." I paused, letting the weight of the words sink in, letting them understand what revocable meant. I am the grantor. You are merely the beneficiary. Or rather, I said, pulling out my old flip phone, you were. I held up the phone. This call I made to Ben 10 minutes ago. Ben Carter isn't some old friend from the nursing home, Sabrina. He is my corporate attorney. He is the trustee of the McKinley Holdings portfolio. And that phone call was not a cry for help. I looked back at Patrick. That phone call was a directive. Per Article 7, Section 3 of the Trust Agreement, the grantor reserves the right to revoke this trust in its entirety at any time. I gave the order. As of 10 minutes ago, the McKinley Valor Trust has been officially, legally, and irrevocably dissolved. I watched his face. I watched the blood drain from it. He was processing the words dissolved. All assets. I continued pressing the final nail into the coffin. All $5,240,000 and change have already been transferred back to the primary holding account of McKinley Holdings. They are no longer yours, Patrick. They were never yours. Patrick's face didn't just go pale. It crumpled. It was the face of a man who hadn't just lost a lottery ticket, but who had just realized the very ground he was standing on had never actually existed. No, he whispered. It was a pathetic sound. No. You can't. You wouldn't. The password. The accounts. I manage them. You manage access to them, son. I said, my voice softening, almost sad. I gave you that. I wanted you to learn. I wanted you to feel the responsibility of it. I kept waiting for you to do something with it. To build something. To become something. But you just used it. You used it as collateral for your cars, for your vacations, for your wife's designer dresses. You used it as a prop to build a life of lies. I turned to Sabrina. She was staring at Patrick, her face a mask of absolute pure hatred. The realization had hit her too. The man she married wasn't a secret millionaire. He was a dependent, a fraud. But, Patrick stammered, his mind racing, trying to find a loophole. The bank. The statements. It's my name. It's the name of the trust, Patrick, I said patiently, as if explaining to a child. A trust that I controlled. A trust that paid for this house. A trust that paid for that BMW. A trust that until 10 minutes ago paid for every single thing in your entire hollow life. I put the phone back in my pocket. Congratulations, Patrick. For the first time in your adult life, you are truly on your own. You are officially, completely, and utterly bankrupt. Patrick's face didn't just go pale. It crumpled. It imploded. This wasn't just a loss. It was an annihilation of his entire identity. He stumbled backward, his hand grasping at the cold brick of the house as if trying to hold himself up. No, he whispered, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. You can't. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, frantic denial. You can't. I control the accounts. I have the passwords, the admin login. You don't even know how to use a smartphone. He pointed at my old flip phone, which was now back in my pocket. He was latching on to the one thing he thought made him superior, his grasp of technology. He saw me as an analog relic. He had no idea. I changed the security codes weekly, Dad. He almost shrieked, his voice cracking. You couldn't get in. You don't know how. I almost smiled. Son, I said, my voice calm. What do you think I did before I started pouring concrete? Before I ever bid on a construction contract? He just stared at me blankly. I was a software engineer, Patrick, I said. I started my career in the late 70s. I was writing code when you were still in diapers. I built the back-end security protocols for my first company from scratch. When I established that trust, I designed the digital architecture myself. Your admin login. That was a guest account, son. A sandbox for you to play in with limited permissions so you could feel like you were in charge. I always held the root key. This was a truth he couldn't process. It was outside his entire understanding of who I was. But Ben, he stammered, looking for another branch to grab. Ben wouldn't. Ben Carter, I said, is my lawyer, my trustee, and the executor of my estate. That 10-minute phone call wasn't just to tell him to kick you out of the house. That was a coded executive order. I called it the Thanksgiving package. It authorized him to execute 3 things simultaneously. I held up one finger. 1, the legal eviction notice for this property effective immediately. I held up a second finger. 2, the immediate repossession of all company assets you were currently using, including the BMW. And then I held up a third. And 3, the immediate execution of the revocation clause in the McKinley Valor Trust, transferring all $5,240,000 back into my primary holding account. I let that sink in. Ben Carter locked every account 5 minutes ago, Patrick, I said, my voice dropping. The money is gone. It has returned to its owner. The down payment for this house. The capital for your fund. The car. The vacations. The lies. All of it. Gone. I looked at him, a man of 42, now reduced to the terrified child he had always been. Congratulations, Patrick, I said softly. You are officially bankrupt. I watched him slide down the brick wall until he was sitting on the frozen ground. But my eyes shifted to Sabrina. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at the house or the tow truck. She was staring at Patrick. Her face was no longer pale. It was dark with a rage that was terrifying to behold. She had just realized that the man she had married, the man she had tied her life to, wasn't just a fraud. He was a fool, and she had bet everything on him. Sabrina didn't scream, not at first. The rage that consumed her was too cold, too precise for that. She turned very slowly away from me and the house. Her entire body was shaking, but not from fear. It was from pure, undiluted hatred. She faced Patrick, who was still slumped against the wall, trying to make himself small. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was a low, terrifying hiss like a serpent about to strike. You, she said. Just that one word. Patrick flinched. Sabrina, baby, I can explain. He tricked me. You lied, she hissed, taking a step toward him. You lied to me. Her hand came up and she pointed a diamond-ringed finger at his chest. You told me it was your money. You told me you built it. You told me you were the genius. I am, he stammered. You are nothing, and she shrieked, and that's when she finally broke. The cold calm shattered, and a wild, cornered animal emerged. She launched herself at him. You're a liar, she screamed, slapping him hard across the face. The sound was sharp like a firecracker echoing in the cold air. Patrick yelped and raised his arms to cover his head. Sabrina, stop the neighbors. I don't care about the neighbors, she screamed, clawing at his face, his expensive suit. You're a fraud, a useless, pathetic fraud. You ruined my life. You dragged me into this lie. She was hitting him with her fists, scratching with her nails. This wasn't a lover's spat. This was a predator tearing its failed mate apart. Patrick just cowered, whimpering, trying to protect his face, offering no defense. It was pathetic. I had seen him do this before when she was merely angry about a dinner reservation. Now faced with the complete collapse of their shared fantasy, he was even worse. I gave up everything for you, she raged, her voice breaking with sobs of fury. I married you. I tied myself to you, to this loser who was just playing dress-up with his daddy's money. You're nothing. You're worse than him. She gestured wildly at me. At least he has money. You have nothing. She finally stumbled back, breathing heavily, her hair a mess, her mascara running. Patrick slowly lowered his arms. There were bright red scratches down his cheek. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to stop her, pleading for me to fix this. I just stood there holding Leo's hand. I didn't move a muscle. This was their creation. They could wallow in it. Sabrina, seeing no help from me, suddenly stopped crying. Her eyes narrowed again. She had just had another realization. She looked at her diamond ring, then at her designer purse on the ground, then at the driveway. Sabrina suddenly stopped hitting him. Her breath was ragged, but her mind was clearly working, processing, calculating. She had realized the fight with Patrick was pointless. He was a sinking ship. She needed a lifeboat. Her eyes scanned the room, desperate, and landed on the hall table by the door. The keys to the BMW. A new, different kind of smile flickered across her face. A feral, desperate smile. "I don't care," she said, her voice low and shaky but filled with new resolve. "He can have his house, I'm taking the car." She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "The BMW. It's in my name, old man. Patrick put it in my name as a gift. It's mine. You can't touch it." She was so sure, so convinced of this one small victory. "I'm taking it," she spat, "and I'm taking everything I can fit in it. You can't stop me." Before Patrick could even react, she lunged for the table, snatching the heavy silver-crested keys. She didn't bother with a coat. She didn't bother with her purse. She just sprinted for the front door, yanking it open and running out into the freezing cold. She was making a break for it, a desperate dash for her last remaining status symbol. Patrick, ever the fool, yelled, "Sabrina, wait! Baby, wait for me!" He started to stumble after her. I just stood there for a moment. I looked down at Leo, who was watching the chaos with wide, frightened eyes. "It's okay, son," I said softly, patting his shoulder. "Let's go watch the show." I put my arm around him, and we walked calmly out onto the front porch. We didn't hurry. We didn't need to. I already knew how this scene was going to end. The tow truck driver, I knew, was very punctual, and Ben had made that call 10 minutes ago. I put my arm around Leo's small shoulders, and we walked out onto the front porch. The cold air hit us immediately, but I didn't care. Leo just pulled my old wool coat tighter around himself. We stood there, two silent spectators at the end of the world. Sabrina was on the driveway, standing in the harsh glare of the porch light. She was clicking the key fob, a frantic, repetitive click, click, click in the night air. She aimed it at the gleaming black BMW 7 Series parked by the curb. Nothing happened. The car remained dark, silent, lifeless. "What?" she muttered, her voice a cloud of vapor in the cold. "What's wrong with this stupid thing?" She clicked it again, harder this time, as if the force of her thumb could will it to work. Click, 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 click. "Work, damn it!" she shrieked. She started to walk toward it, her high heels sinking awkwardly into the frozen grass of the lawn. And that's when she finally saw it. The car wasn't just parked. A heavy-duty tow truck, its yellow emergency lights slowly revolving, was parked directly behind it. A thick industrial tow hook was already latched onto the BMW's front axle. The chain was taut. The truck's engine was rumbling, a low, powerful growl that promised it wasn't going anywhere without taking the car with it. Sabrina stopped dead. Her entire body went rigid. I could see her mind trying to process the image. The tow truck, the hook, the silent car, her key fob. "No," she whispered. The wind carried the sound to us. "No, no, no, no." She ran to the car, yanking on the driver's side door handle. It was locked, solid. She banged on the window with her fist. "This is my car." "What are you doing? This is my car." The neighbors who had been watching the drama from their own porches were now murmuring amongst themselves, pointing at the truck. This was even better than the fight. Sabrina spun around, her face a mask of complete, utter disbelief. She looked at the truck, then at the house, and finally her eyes landed on me. I was just standing there on the porch, watching. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. I just met her gaze. And in that moment, she knew, she knew this wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't bad luck. This was me. This was part of the same swift, silent blade that had already taken her home and her husband's imaginary fortune. This was the Thanksgiving package. The cab door of the tow truck opened with a metallic creak. A man in a heavy blue uniform stepped out holding a lit clipboard in one hand. He was large, unhurried, and looked completely unfazed by the screaming woman beating on the BMW's window. He walked over to Sabrina, stopping a respectable 5 feet away. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, "you're going to want to step away from the vehicle." "This is my car!" Sabrina shrieked, her voice cracking. "You can't take it. I'll have you arrested. I'll have you fired." The man just sighed clearly, having heard this 1,000 times before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another set of keys that looked identical to the ones Sabrina was clutching. He jangled them slightly. "Looking for these, ma'am?" he asked, not unkindly. "Or rather, a set that works. This vehicle is scheduled for an immediate repossession. I've already disabled the ignition. Your keys are just pieces of metal now." Sabrina stared at the keys in his hand, then at her own, then at me on the porch. The last bit of her frantic energy seemed to drain away, replaced by a cold, numb confusion. "Repossessed," she whispered. That's not possible. It's paid for. It's in my name. Patrick, tell him." Patrick, who had just stumbled onto the driveway, froze. He looked at the tow truck, at the driver, at me. He had no lies left. "It's not in your name, Sabrina," I said, my voice carrying easily in the cold, still air. "I'm afraid Patrick lied about that too." She turned to me, her eyes wide. "What? The car was never his to give you," I explained. "It's a company car. It's leased. It's registered to, owned by, and paid for by McKinley Holdings." The tow truck driver checked his clipboard. "That's correct, sir," he called out to me as if I were his supervisor. "Got the order right here. Immediate retrieval of asset. Order from McKinley Holdings." Sabrina looked back at me, the dots finally connecting in her mind, forming a constellation of her complete and total ruin. The house, the $5 million fund, and now the car. All of it had been me. You bastard," she whispered, her voice choking on the word. You let me believe. You believed what you wanted to believe," I said. "You saw what you wanted to see. You never asked. You never cared to look past the shiny toys. You just took. And now I'm taking them back." The driver tipped his hat. "Have a good night, folks. I'll have this out of your way in a minute." He turned and walked back to his cab, leaving them standing in the driveway in the cold, with nothing. Sabrina stood frozen on the sidewalk, the keys still dangling uselessly from her hand. She stared at the tow truck driver, then at the BMW, then at me. The name the driver had read from his clipboard was echoing in the space between us. "McKinley Holdings." She repeated, her voice barely a whisper. She said the name as if it were a foreign word, something she had never heard before, but the fear in her eyes told me she was starting to understand. She looked at Patrick, a desperate, silent question. "What is McKinley Holdings?" Patrick just shook his head, his face ashen. He knew. He had always known on some level where the money came from, though he never dared to ask. "That's right," I said, my voice calm. I stepped off the porch, walking slowly toward her, Leo's small hand still clutching mine. "My company." Sabrina's head snapped back to me. Your company. One of them, Mammoth," I said. "The primary one. The one that actually owns everything. The one that signs my pension checks every month." I stopped just a few feet from her. I could smell the expensive perfume she wore, a scent I now realized I had paid for. "That BMW was never a gift, Sabrina," I explained, as one might explain a simple concept to a child. Patrick didn't buy it for you. It's a corporate asset, a line item on a budget sheet. It belongs to McKinley Holdings and it's leased in the company's name. You weren't the owner. You were just borrowing it. The keys slipped from her fingers and fell to the asphalt with a small metallic clink. The sound was so final. And now, I continued, I want it back. Consider your borrowing privileges revoked, permanently. She opened her mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. She couldn't argue. She couldn't threaten. She had no leverage. She had no power. The entire identity she had built was based on assets that were never hers. Patrick finally stumbled forward, on his voice a pathetic whine. Dad, please. How are we supposed to get home? It's freezing. You can't just leave us here. I looked at him. The 42-year-old man who had stood by silent while his wife put his own son outside to freeze. The man who had lived a lie funded by me and then used that lie to look down on me. That sounds like a personal problem, Patrick, I said. I turned to walk back inside, then paused as if a final thought had just occurred to me. Oh, and Sabrina, I said, looking back at her. Just so you know, that little corporate gas card Patrick let you use, the one you've been filling up that BMW with Ben, canceled that about 15 minutes ago, along with all the other credit lines. I gave them a small, tight nod. Good luck getting home. I guided Leo back inside the warm house and firmly shut the heavy oak door, leaving them alone on the curb in the cold, with the slowly revolving lights of the tow truck bathing them in a rhythmic yellow glow. I closed the heavy door. The solid thud cut off the sounds from outside, the rumble of the tow truck's engine, Patrick's pathetic whining, and Sabrina's rising sobs. The house was suddenly quiet. Leo was still trembling, but not from the cold anymore. He was processing the shock. It's okay, Leo, I said again, my voice softer now. You're safe. I led him to the living room window, the one I had looked through just 30 minutes earlier. I pushed aside the heavy curtain. The show wasn't over. And there it was, the most perfectly bitter piece of irony I had ever witnessed. Sabrina had collapsed. She was sitting no-sprawled on the curb right by the frozen azalea bushes. It was the exact spot. The very patch of icy grass where I had found Leo, cowering the spot where he had been left to freeze. She in her $1,000 silk dress was now sitting on the dirty frozen concrete. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, and her head was buried in her hands. Her perfect, expensive hairdo was coming undone, strands of hair sticking to her tear-streaked face. Her mascara, which she had probably spent an hour applying, was running in black rivers down her cheeks. She was no longer the elegant, untouchable queen of the house. She was a ruined woman, sitting on a curb, just another piece of trash left out on the street. Patrick was hovering over her, flapping his hands uselessly. Sabrina, please, get up. People are watching. Get up. She shoved his hand away with a wild gesture. Don't touch me, she screamed at him, her voice muffled by her hands. It's all your fault. It was a beautiful, terrible symmetry. The woman who had just moments ago looked down on a child suffering in the cold was now brought low, sitting in the very same dirt, in the very same humiliation. She had wanted Leo to know his place. It seemed the universe, with a little help from me, had decided to show Sabrina hers. I stood there watching with Leo quiet beside me. I felt nothing, no pity, no triumph. Just a cold, clean sense of order being restored. The scales which had been tipped by cruelty and arrogance were finally balancing out. Patrick stumbled out onto the porch, drawn by his wife's screams. He was no longer the defiant, puffed-up millionaire. He was just a 42-year-old man in an expensive suit, watching his entire life get towed away. He saw Sabrina huddled on the curb, sobbing. He saw the tow truck hooking up his beloved BMW. He saw the neighbors watching, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. He turned to me. His face, which had been red with false bravado moments before, was now a sickly pale white. His hands were shaking. "Dad," he whispered. The word was a plea. "Dad, please." He walked toward me, his steps unsteady, his arms half raised as if begging for an embrace or perhaps begging me to stop the world from spinning. "Please," he said again, his voice cracking. Don't do this. Okay, you win. The house. You can have the house. Just stop this. Please, the car, the money." I just looked at him. I said nothing. I let him unravel. What are we supposed to do?" he cried, tears now streaming freely down his face, mixing with the scratches Sabrina had left. "Where are we supposed to go? We have nothing. You can't just throw us out on the street. It's Thanksgiving. It's freezing." The irony was lost on him. He was worried about the cold, but only for himself. He had forgotten again about the small boy standing next to me, wrapped in my coat, watching his father fall apart. I finally spoke. My voice wasn't angry. It was just tired. Tired of 40 years of excuses, of failures, of weakness. "You're going to do what you should have done 10 years ago, Patrick," I said. He looked at me confused, sniffing. What's that?" "You're going to get a job," I said. "A real one. One that requires you to wake up in the morning and earn a paycheck." I paused, then looked down at Leo, who was watching his father with wide, unblinking eyes. "And," I added, my voice hardening, "you're going to start learning how to be a father. Though frankly, it might already be too late for that." Patrick was still on the ground, a whimpering mess by the brick wall. Sabrina, however, was a different animal. She was breathing heavily, her eyes darting between me, the tow truck, and her useless husband. She was a rat in a trap, and she was looking for a new way out. And then, as if on cue, a new sound sliced through the cold night air. A sharp digital ringtone. Her phone. She fumbled in the pocket of her stained dress, her hands shaking so badly it took her 3 tries to retrieve the phone. She stared at the screen, and I saw her face, already pale with rage, turn a shade whiter. She answered it, her voice a brittle whisper. "Hello?" There was a long pause. I just watched her. Leo was quiet beside me, his small hand still gripping my trousers. Sabrina's eyes widened. "What?" she said, her voice climbing an octave. "What do you mean, a security flag? That's impossible. I just used it this morning at the salon. You need to try it again. It's a—" She stopped. She was listening intently now, her whole body rigid. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the phone so hard I thought it might snap. And then I heard her clearly, a high-pitched shriek that was half scream, half sob. "What do you mean the collateral is no longer valid?" "What collateral? It's an American Express black card. It's— What? What do you mean the guaranteeing account is empty?" Her head snapped up. She didn't look at Patrick. She didn't look at the neighbors. She looked straight at me. The hatred was still there, burning in her eyes, but it was now swimming in a new, deeper emotion. It was pure, unadulterated terror. She had finally realized that this wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't me winning one round. This was a systematic demolition. This was me pulling the pins from every grenade she was holding. She staggered to her feet, the phone still pressed to her ear, the voice on the other end still talking, but she wasn't listening anymore. "You," she whispered, the sound barely audible. "You did this. How could you do this? That's my account. My credit." I took a step closer to the porch rail just so my voice would carry clearly. "No, Sabrina," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle. "It was never your account. It was his." I nodded at Patrick, who looked up confused. "That black card you've been waving around for 2 years," I continued. "It's not a primary account. It's a supplementary card. It's linked to a primary account holder. You were just a guest on someone else's line of credit. Patrick scrambled to his feet. But, but it's not linked to the fund. No, son. It's not, I said. It's linked to mine. The real one. The McKinley Holdings corporate account. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The one lie I had allowed to continue just a little bit longer just for this moment. You see, Sabrina, I explained as if to a child. When Patrick and Emily first got married, I gave him a supplementary card to my corporate account. For emergencies, groceries, things for Leo. Simple things. I looked at Patrick. When you came along, son, you told me Sabrina needed one too, for business expenses for her imaginary family trust in New York. I knew you were lying, both of you, but I said yes. Sabrina was shaking her head as if she could deny the truth I was speaking. I said yes, I repeated, because I wanted to see exactly what you would do with it. I wanted a record, and you didn't disappoint. $3,000 for a handbag at Gucci, $5,000 for a weekend in Miami without my son, $10,000 for that awful painting in the living room. I have all the statements, Sabrina. They're very detailed. The bank didn't freeze your account because of a security flag, I said. The bank froze your account because 30 minutes ago, Ben Carter, my lawyer, informed them that the supplementary card issued to Sabrina Valor, your fake family name, I always found that amusing, was reported stolen. Stolen? She whispered, the blood draining from her face. Yes, by you. The bank is currently reversing every charge you've made in the last 90 days, and as the guaranteeing account you used for collateral on all your other credit lines, that card was the one pin holding up your entire financial house of cards. When I reported it stolen, the bank automatically flagged all of your associated accounts. They're not just frozen, Sabrina. They're being seized. I looked at this woman who had just threatened to destroy me in court with her endless imaginary money. She was holding a useless piece of plastic. She had nothing. No, that wasn't right. She had less than nothing. She was buried in debt that she now had no conceivable way to pay. You, she finally said, her voice choking on her rage. You, monster, what did you do? I just looked at her. I did nothing, I said. I just stopped paying for your lies. The rest is just gravity. I didn't do anything, I said. My voice was calm, almost conversational, which seemed to enrage her even more. That wasn't me, Sabrina. That was the bank. She stared at me, uncomprehending. The bank? What are you talking about? It's just computers, really, I said. Automated systems. The bank's risk assessment software just detected that the primary guaranteeing account for your unlimited American Express card, an account which you believed held $5 million, suddenly has a balance of 0. Patrick, who was still on the ground, looked up, his face a mask of confusion. But that's not... The Amex wasn't tied to that account. Oh, but it was, son, I said. Not directly. You see, when you have a $5 million trust, even one you can't really touch, banks are very happy to give you other toys. They gave you that shiny black card. They gave you lines of credit. They gave you car loans. All of it secured by guarantees by the collateral of that $5 million fund. I let the lesson sink in. When I made that phone call to Ben, I didn't just take back the house and the car. I evaporated your collateral. I pulled the plug. The bank's computer doing its job saw that the $5 million guaranteeing all your debts had vanished. So it did what banks do. It froze everything. I gestured to her phone, which she was still clutching. That call you just got, that was the first domino. That was the bank informing you that your unlimited card is now just a piece of plastic, and in a few minutes your Visa will be declined, then your MasterCard. Then the loan you took out for that ridiculous watch on your wrist will be called in. I looked at them both, this pathetic, bankrupt couple standing on my driveway in their ruined Thanksgiving finery. "Your entire paper empire," I said softly, "the one you built to look down on me, just collapsed. It's all gone." The sound of Sabrina's breathing was harsh in the cold. It was a ragged gasp. This was a truth she couldn't fight. She couldn't scream at a bank's computer system. She couldn't intimidate a risk assessment algorithm. It was at that moment in the terrible frozen silence that we all heard it. A new sound. The sound of other front doors opening. Mrs. Gable from across the street in her bathrobe. The Miller family next door. They weren't just peeking through their blinds anymore. The screaming, the tow truck, and now this. This utter silent despair. It was too much to resist. They were stepping out onto their porches watching us. The humiliation was no longer private. It was now a neighborhood spectacle. Sabrina was now well and truly cornered. The last domino, her credit, her status, her entire constructed identity had fallen. She looked at the tow truck now hoisting the front wheels of the BMW off the ground. She looked at Patrick, who was sobbing like a child huddled by the wall. And then she looked out at the street. The neighbors were no longer just watching from their porches. They were on their lawns. Mrs. Gable was in her bathrobe, her arms crossed. The Miller family was standing near their mailbox, whispering. They were all staring at her. This was the final humiliation. It wasn't just the loss of the money. It was the loss of the image, the public undeniable stripping of her superiority. And that's when she lost all control. "You!" she shrieked, and this time the sound was not one of rage but of a cornered animal. She pointed a shaking finger at me, standing calmly on the porch with Leo. "You did this, you monster!" She stumbled forward onto the lawn, her high heels sinking into the soft, cold turf, making her lurch awkwardly. "You planned this, all of it, this entire day." Her voice was raw, tearing through the quiet neighborhood. You let us. You let us believe you were nothing. A pathetic old man, you let us. You watched us, you've been playing a game." Patrick looked up, his face streaked with tears and snot. "Sabrina, stop. People are—" "I don't care about people," she screamed, gesturing wildly at the watching neighbors. "He wants a show. Let's give them a show. He's a liar, a manipulator. He lied to all of us. He lied to his own son." She spun back to face me, her eyes wild. "You're a sick, cruel old man. You sat there in our house eating our food, letting us pity you all while you were planning to destroy us. You're a monster. You're the monster." Leo flinched at her screams and pressed his face into my coat. I just put my hand on his back, rubbing it gently. I didn't say a word. My silence, my calmness only seemed to break her further. It was the one thing she couldn't fight. "Say something," she demanded. "Admit it, you planned this. You wanted to humiliate us. You enjoyed it, didn't you? Sitting there all high and mighty with your secret money. You're disgusting. You're worse than anything you think we are." She was completely unhinged, a public spectacle of her own making, broadcasting her guilt and greed to the entire street. She thought she was accusing me, but all she was doing was confirming exactly who she was. And I just stood there, letting her dig her own grave, one unhinged scream at a time. I let her scream. I let her unravel. I let the entire neighborhood see the venom she had hidden so well for so long. Leo was still pressed against my leg, his face hidden in my coat. I just kept my hand on his back, a silent, steady presence. When she finally paused, gasping for breath, her face blotchy and wet, I spoke. My voice wasn't a shout. It was calm. It was measured. But it was loud enough to carry across the lawn, loud enough for every watching neighbor to hear every single word. "I didn't plan anything, Sabrina," I said. She stared at me, her chest heaving, momentarily silenced by my quiet tone. "I didn't plan this," I repeated. "I'm just reacting. I am reacting to you." I took a step forward, moving Leo gently behind me. I was no longer on the porch. I was on the top step, looking down at her. I drove 3 hours to have Thanksgiving dinner with my son. I arrived to find my grandson. My grandson, freezing to death on your lawn. I pointed to the exact spot on the curb where she was now standing, her designer dress ruined. You, I said, my voice like ice, put a 10-year-old child outside, in 15-degree weather, in a t-shirt and shorts, and you left him there while you sat inside a warm house preparing to eat a feast. She flinched as if my words were physical blows. The neighbors were silent, hanging on every word. I heard your justification, I continued. I heard you tell me he needed a lesson, that he needed to learn his place. You called it discipline. I let the word hang in the cold air, letting the neighbors, letting Patrick, letting her truly hear it. Then I delivered the final verdict. I don't call it a lesson, Sabrina, I said, my voice clear and cutting. I call it what it is. I call it abuse. You weren't teaching him. You were torturing him. And I reacted. Sabrina didn't have a response. She couldn't. How could she defend that she had just been publicly, calmly, and accurately labeled an abuser in front of her entire neighborhood? The narrative she had tried to spin of the crazy old man had just been shattered. She was the monster, not me. Patrick, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, finally seemed to understand what I had just done. I hadn't just taken his money. I had taken his wife's reputation. And in this neighborhood, that was worth even more. My calm public accusation of abuse was the one thing she could not fight. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't spin it. The neighbors had seen her. I had seen her. And Leo, now pressed silently against my leg, was the living proof. Backed into a corner, she did what all cornered animals do. She didn't defend the action. She attacked the reason. He deserved it! She shrieked, her voice tearing in the freezing air, all pretense of class and sophistication gone. He deserved every second of it. He's just like you. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at me. A leech, both of you. Just leeches, that's all you are. Patrick, hearing his wife finally cross the line, actually took a step toward her. Sabrina, stop it. That's enough. Don't what, Patrick? She wheeled on him, her eyes wild. Don't tell the truth. This boy, she spat the word, gesturing at Leo, is a constant walking reminder of her, of your pathetic, boring first life. And she pointed back at me. He is a reminder of everything I've fought my entire life to escape. What are you talking about, Sabrina? I asked, my voice deliberately low. Failure. She screamed, the word echoing across the lawns. Poverty. I'm talking about sad, pathetic, poor people. I have been surrounded by it my entire life. I grew up in it. I swore to God I would never go back. And now I see it's all I've been living with. And then it happened. The dam broke. The entire carefully constructed edifice of Sabrina Valor crumbled right there on my front lawn for all the neighbors to see. The truth, not my truth, but hers, poured out in a torrent of rage and bitter self-pity. You sit there, she sobbed, half laughing, half crying, in your cheap coat and your old shoes, judging me. She jabbed a finger at her own chest. You think you know anything about me? Do you know what it's like to grow up with nothing? To share a bed with two sisters? To count pennies to see if you can afford the heat or the food, but never both? To wear shoes with cardboard in the soles to block the snow? This was new. This was not the heiress from New York. This was a story I knew all too well. It was my own. You have no idea, she continued, pacing frantically on the grass, tearing at her own hair. I spent 20 years of my life clawing my way out. I learned how to dress. I learned how to talk. I learned which fork to use. I learned how to be someone else, someone better, someone who belonged in the rooms you've never even seen. She stopped breathing heavily and turned her venomous gaze back to Patrick, who looked utterly bewildered. And I thought I'd finally made it, she whispered, her voice thick with hatred. I thought I had found him. I thought I had won. Patrick just looked at her confused. Sabrina, what? My family trust fund? She laughed, a bitter, ugly, broken sound. My parents in New York, my weekends in the Hamptons. It was all a lie, you idiot. Patrick's face went blank. What? What do you mean? I mean my parents live in a rusted-out, double-wide trailer in Dayton, Ohio, she screamed at the top of her lungs. I mean my trust fund was the minimum wage I earned waitressing at a country club, listening to women like me talk about their real money. I invented her. I invented Sabrina Valor so I could finally escape the filth, so I could meet someone real, someone successful, someone rich. She turned her gaze back to me, the poor old man. And then I met him. And he was perfect. He had the house, he had the car, he had the fund, $5 million. She said the number like a prayer. He was my ticket. He was my way out. He was real. She paused, her breathing ragged. The entire street was dead silent. Even the tow truck driver had stopped working, just watching, mesmerized. She looked from me, the penniless father, who had just revoked everything, to Patrick, the rich son, who had just been exposed as a hollow fraud. The final devastating realization washed over her face, and it was a terrible thing to see. I didn't marry a successful man, she whispered, the horror dawning. I married you. She was looking at Patrick, but she was describing the very poverty she had just railed against. I married a fraud, a poor person pretending to be rich, a leech, living off him. She stared at Patrick, the man she had worshipped for his my money. You're not a self-made man, she said, her voice suddenly terrifyingly dead. You're not an investment genius. You're just his son. You're just another lie. Patrick stammered. Sabrina, I am successful. You're nothing, she shrieked, the last of her composure shattering into a million pieces. I hitched my wagon to a lie. I married a loser. I did all of that. I put up with him. She gestured at Leo. I put up with you. She gestured at me. For nothing. She finally collapsed onto the curb, the exact spot where Leo had been, and put her face in her hands. But she wasn't crying for the child. She wasn't crying for her husband. She was crying for herself. Crying for the failed heist that had been her entire marriage. Patrick was catatonic. He just stared at his wife, this stranger who had just publicly detonated her entire identity. But Sabrina wasn't finished. Her rage was a wildfire, and now that her confession had burned her own life to the ground, she needed to make sure I burned with her. She turned away from Patrick, her face a grotesque mask of tears and smeared makeup, and pointed at me. You, she shrieked, her voice hoarse. You're just as bad. No, you're worse. I just raised an eyebrow. Am I? Yes, he. She jabbed a trembling finger at Patrick, who flinched. He's a liar. A pathetic, weak, lying fraud. I married a liar. Her head snapped back to me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. The neighbors on the lawn took a collective step back. And you're his father. You're an even bigger liar. You stood there in your stupid, disgusting old coat, and you watched me. You let me believe you were nothing. You played me. You're both liars. This whole damned family is a lie. I let the accusation hang in the freezing air. Liar is a heavy word. She was using it to make us equals, to drag me down into the mud with her, to justify her own deception. I was not going to let that happen. I shook my head very slowly. No, Sabrina, that's where you're wrong. My voice was still quiet, but it cut through her hysteria, and the neighbors leaned in to hear. I never lied to you, I said. Not one single time. She opened her mouth to argue, but I continued. You never asked me if I was rich. You just assumed I was poor. You judged me by my 10-year-old boots, by my 30-year-old apartment, by my flip phone. You saw what you wanted to see. You saw a simple, harmless old man because that fit your worldview. You never looked deeper because, frankly, you didn't care enough to look deeper. I took a step off the porch onto the top step. Leo was still pressed against my leg, quiet as a stone. I never told you about my bank accounts, I continued. I never told you about my business or my assets. That isn't a lie, Sabrina. That's called privacy. I kept my life private because I learned a long, long time ago that money makes people ugly. It makes them greedy. It makes them cruel. It makes them, well, it makes them just like you. The barb hit its mark. She flinched. There is a very big difference between us, I said. I didn't tell you the truth about my finances, but you invented a life that wasn't real. I started to list her lies, my voice gaining strength. You didn't just omit things. You fabricated them. You invented a wealthy family in New York. You invented a trust fund. You invented an education. You put on a costume every single day, the clothes, the arrogance, the fake accent you use when you're ordering wine, all to trap a man you thought was rich. I kept my secret as a shield, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, hard whisper. A shield to protect my family from the very greed that you represent. I pointed at her. Your lie, I said, was a weapon. You used it to manipulate my son. You used it to justify your cruelty to my grandson. You used it to look down on me. I looked at Patrick, then back at her. You screamed that you married a liar. You're right. You did. But the biggest liar on this lawn, the only real fraud, is you. Patrick was catatonic. He just stared at his wife, this stranger who had just publicly detonated her entire identity. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't defiant. He looked hollow. The adrenaline was gone and the cold, hard truth was flooding in. I watched him process everything. He had lost the $5 million fund. He had lost the house. He had lost the BMW. And now he had just learned that the woman he had worshipped, the sophisticated, wealthy heiress he had married, was a complete fabrication. She was a lie from start to finish. He understood in that terrible moment that Sabrina had never loved him. She had loved the McKinley Valor Fund. She had loved the status, the car, the house. She had loved the money that he himself didn't even really have. And then I saw his eyes shift. They moved from Sabrina still weeping on the curb to me standing on the porch, and a new, deeper, more devastating understanding washed over his face. He realized that his entire life was a lie stacked on top of another lie. Sabrina had been using him for the money she thought he had, and he had been using me for the money he knew I had, all while pretending to be an independent, successful man. He was a fraud married to a fraud. He was a parasite who had been tricked by another parasite. He saw it all. He saw that he had no wife. He had no father. He had no home. He had no car. He had no money. He had no identity. He was a 42-year-old man standing on a driveway in a ruined suit with scratches on his face, and he owned nothing, not even his own dignity. The fight just left him. His shoulders slumped. His head bowed. He didn't make a sound. He just walked like a zombie to the base of the porch steps, far from Sabrina, and sat down hard on the cold stone. He put his head in his hands, and his body began to shake with deep, silent, agonizing sobs. He had finally, truly hit rock bottom. The distant wail of sirens, which had been a faint underscore to Sabrina's unhinged confession, grew suddenly louder. Within a minute, 2 police cruisers turned onto our quiet street, their red and blue lights flashing, cutting hypnotic, silent circles across the houses and the shocked faces of my neighbors. They parked one behind the tow truck, one in front of my driveway, effectively blocking the entire scene. The neighbors fell silent. Even Sabrina stopped her hysterical sobbing, her breath catching in her throat. The only sound was Patrick's quiet, broken whimpering from the steps. Two officers got out. They were professional, cautious, their hands resting near their belts. They surveyed the bizarre Thanksgiving tableau, the tow truck with the BMW hitched the crowd of neighbors in bathrobes. Sabrina, a ruined mess on the curb, Patrick, a collapsed figure on the steps, and me, an old man in a wool coat, holding a small boy's hand on the porch. One of the officers, the older one, addressed the group. "All right, folks, what's going on here? We got a call about a public disturbance." Before Sabrina could launch into her own fabricated story, before Patrick could even lift his head, I walked calmly down the porch steps, leading Leo by the hand. I made sure to keep the small boy slightly behind me in a protective stance. I stopped a few feet from the officer. "Good evening, officers," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I apologize for the noise. My name is Owen McKinley." The officer looked at me, then at the chaotic scene. "And what's your part in this, sir?" "This is my house," I said, simply gesturing to the building behind me. "This is my grandson, Leo." I put my hand on Leo's shoulder. "I am asking these two individuals," I pointed clearly to Patrick and Sabrina, "to leave my property. They are refusing, and as you can see, they are causing a significant disturbance." My statement was factual, calm, devoid of the emotion and hysteria that defined them. I was the reasonable property owner. They were the trespassers. The officer looked from me, the picture of elderly stability, to Sabrina, who was now glaring at me with pure venom, and to Patrick, who just sat there broken. The lines were drawn clearly in the sand. The officer, a man named Peterson, according to his name tag, looked at me, an old man in a worn wool coat. Then he looked at Patrick in his ruined but clearly expensive suit and Sabrina in her designer dress. He was weighing the visual evidence, the wealthy-looking couple versus the disheveled old man. I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "Sir," he said, addressing me with a neutral, professional tone, "you're claiming this is your property and you want them removed." "That is correct, officer," I replied. "Do you have any proof of ownership, sir? A driver's license with this address? A utility bill?" Patrick, hearing this, lifted his head slightly. A tiny spark of hope flickered in his eyes. He thought I was just an old man. He thought I lived in a different city. He thought I couldn't possibly have proof. Sabrina, too, stopped her sobbing and watched, sensing a potential lifeline. "I do," I said. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my old flip phone, the one they always mocked. Patrick almost smiled. What was I going to do? Show him a blurry photo? I flipped it open. I didn't make a call. I just pressed a few buttons. The screen glowed. "Officer," I said, holding it out, "I don't have a utility bill as this isn't my primary residence. However, my lawyer, Mr. Carter, prepared for this eventuality. What you're looking at is a secure link to the county registrar's office." The officer took the phone, confused. "Tap the link," I instructed. He did. "The password is McKinley70. He typed it in. His eyes widened slightly as a PDF document loaded on the small screen. It was the official digitally certified deed for 124 Willow Creek Drive, clear as day. Owner McKinley Holdings, LLC. Sole proprietor Owen McKinley. "And if you'll check my wallet," I said, pulling out my old leather wallet, "you'll see my driver's license. Owen McKinley. The photo matches. The name matches the deed." The officer looked at the deed on the phone, then at my license. He looked at Patrick and Sabrina, whose faces had collapsed in final absolute defeat. They had watched me use my stupid old phone to digitally prove my ownership. They had underestimated me on every single front. The officer handed me back my phone and license. His entire demeanor had changed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, professional understanding. He now knew exactly who he was dealing with. He was no longer mediating a family squabble. He was enforcing the law. The officer nodded, a short, sharp gesture. The last piece of the puzzle had clicked into place for him. He handed me back my phone and my license, his expression now firm, professional. He understood. He turned to face Patrick and Sabrina. He was no longer a mediator. He was an enforcer. "Sir, ma'am," he said, his voice now carrying the unmistakable ring of authority. "I have verified that this gentleman, Mr. Owen McKinley, is the legal owner of this property. You are here without his permission. You are by legal definition trespassing." Sabrina looked up, her face a mess of tear tracks and dirt. But we live here. You can't just—" "Ma'am, I don't care about your living arrangements." The officer cut her off, his patience clearly gone. "I care about the law, and the law says the owner wants you gone. You have two options." He put his hand on his belt. "One, you gather your personal belongings and you leave this property peacefully right now. Two, you refuse and I place you both under arrest for criminal trespassing. What's it going to be?" There was no third option, no negotiation, no more lies. Patrick just stared at the officer, his mouth opening and closing. Sabrina looked at the BMW now fully hitched to the tow truck, which was preparing to pull away. She looked at the neighbors who were watching this final humiliating act. She looked at her husband, a broken, useless man. No house, no car, no money, no $5 million fund, no credit, nothing. Slowly, like two people walking in a dream, they turned. They didn't even look at me or Leo, they just walked. They walked past the watching neighbors, past the police cars, and down the dark, cold street. Patrick in his ruined suit. Sabrina in her silk dress, her high heels clicking on the frozen asphalt. They had to leave. They had no other choice. The police cruisers pulled away, their red and blue lights disappearing down the street. The tow truck turned the corner, taking the last symbol of their fraudulent life with it. Patrick and Sabrina were gone, two dark figures swallowed by the cold night. The neighborhood was quiet again, though I could feel the eyes of my neighbors peering from behind their curtains, their own. Thanksgiving dinners interrupted by a drama far more compelling than any football game. I was left standing on the lawn with Leo. The freezing air was sharp in my lungs. Leo looked up at me, his small face pale and his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. He was still clutching my hand. Are they gone, Grandpa?" he whispered. "Yes, Leo," I said, my voice softer than it had been all night. "They're gone." I put my arm around his small shoulders and guided him back inside, away from the prying eyes. I closed the heavy oak door, and this time I locked the deadbolt. The click of the lock felt final, like the closing of a tomb. The house felt enormous and hollow. The living room was a wreck from Sabrina's meltdown. Cushions were on the floor. A wine glass was shattered near the fireplace. We walked into the dining room. The scene was almost comical in its tragedy. The magnificent 20-pound turkey sat cold and untouched in the silent oven. The table was set for a feast that never happened. Half-empty wine glasses, abandoned plates of food growing cold. The smell of sage and pine still hung in the air, a ghost of a celebration that had been built on a foundation of lies. Leo looked at the table, at the two empty chairs at its head. He was probably starving. I looked at him, at this small, resilient boy who had endured so much. "Well," I said, breaking the silence, "I don't know about you, but I'm hungry." I looked at the congealed gravy and the cold turkey, and I felt a wave of disgust. It was a feast for show, a feast of lies. I reached for my old flip phone. "How do you feel about pizza, Leo?" His eyes lit up, the first real spark I'd seen in them all night. "Pizza, can we?" "We absolutely can," I said. "Pepperoni, extra cheese." He nodded vigorously, a small smile finally touching his lips. I made the call. As I sat there on the floor by the fireplace, rubbing Leo's back to keep him warm, I looked around at the ruined party. And I realized as I waited for the delivery driver that this was without a doubt the best and most honest Thanksgiving I had had in years. We sat there in the heavy silence, just the two of us, surrounded by the wreckage of a Thanksgiving feast that would never be eaten. The rich smell of the cooling turkey and spilled wine hung in the air. The pizza was on its way. Leo was still wrapped in my heavy wool coat, and the cashmere throw sitting close to the fireplace, his small body finally looking warm. He was quiet, his eyes huge as he looked around the grand, silent room, then at me. "Grandpa," he asked, his voice small, hesitant. "Why? Why was she so mad about the money? She kept screaming about the money." He was a smart boy. He had pieced together the core of the night's explosion. He deserved the truth, or at least as much of the truth as a 10-year-old could carry. "Because Leo," I said, sitting down on the floor, leaning my back against the armchair he was in, "money does terrible things to people. It can make them ugly. It can make them empty." He looked confused. "But you have money, right? You took the car. You own this house. You have the holdings company." He said the name McKinley Holdings like it was a magic word he had just learned, a word of immense power. "I do," I said. "I have a lot of money. More than they ever knew. More than anyone knew." I stared into the fire, the flames dancing in my reflection. "I kept it a secret for a reason, Leo. I didn't do it to trick anyone or to play a game. I did it to protect my family." "Protect them from what?" "From the money itself," I said. "You see, when I was a very young man, my father, your great-grandfather, he got rich. Very rich. He built a small shipping business from nothing and turned it into an empire. And I watched that money destroy my family." Leo listened, his eyes never leaving my face. "I had 2 brothers and a sister." I continued, the memories feeling dusty, ancient. "Before the money, we were a real family. We worked on the docks together. We ate dinner at a small, cramped table. We fought, but we loved each other. After the money, it all changed. My father's money became a poison. My brothers stopped working. They just waited. Waited for their inheritance. They became lazy, demanding, entitled men. They fought over who would get the bigger house, the faster car. My sister, she married a man just like Sabrina. Someone who only wanted her for her family trust. It ruined her. It ruined all of them. When my father died, they tore his estate apart like vultures. I took my small share, the smallest one, and I walked away. I vowed right then, Leo, that I would never ever let that happen to my family. I swore I would never let money poison my son." I sighed, the weight of that old promise feeling heavy. "So I raised your dad, Patrick, without it. I lived simply. I let him think we were just normal. I thought if he grew up without the expectation of wealth, he would learn the value of work. He would learn to be independent. He would learn to be a good man." I looked down at the floor. But I made a different kind of mistake. In my effort to protect him from greed, I protected him from everything. I protected him from failure. When he was young and couldn't pay his rent, I'd secretly cover it. When he got into debt with one of his big ideas, I'd have Ben pay it off anonymously. I protected him so much. He never learned how to stand on his own. He never learned how to be strong. He just became weak. "That $5 million fund," I said, my voice hardening, "that wasn't a gift. It was a test. I set it up when you were born, Leo. I told Patrick I was managing it for him. The plan was simple. I would let him see the money, let him manage it, or think he was managing it, but he couldn't touch the capital. The real test was to see what he would do with that knowledge." I looked at Leo, his eyes full of a new sad understanding. Would he use it as security to build his own life? Would he get a real job, work hard, and treat that fund as a safety net for his family? For you? I shook my head. Or would he just use it as collateral? Use it to borrow money to buy BMWs, to fund a lifestyle of lies, to impress a greedy hollow woman like Sabrina. I paused, the final painful truth settling between us. I needed to see two things, Leo. I needed to see if he could ever become an independent man, and I needed to see if he could be a good father to you. I gestured around the cold, silent, ruined dining room. Tonight, I said, my voice heavy with the weight of my failure. He failed both tests. He proved he was still the weak boy I'd accidentally raised, and he proved he was a terrible father. That's why I did what I did. The pizza arrived 20 minutes later, delivered by a young man who looked confused to see such a grand dark house ordering a simple pepperoni pizza. I paid him in cash, gave him a $50 tip, and told him to have a good Thanksgiving. He left bewildered. I spread the feast out on the expensive coffee table in front of the fireplace. We sat on the floor, Leo and I, eating slices of hot, greasy pizza directly from the cardboard box. We didn't talk. We just ate. The warmth of the fire and the simple, honest food was more comforting than any 20-pound turkey could ever be. Leo, exhausted from the cold and the emotional trauma, finished 2 slices and then curled up on the armchair, pulling my coat and the cashmere blanket tight around him. Within minutes, he was fast asleep, his breathing deep and even for the first time all night. He was finally truly safe. My old flip phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. The screen read, Ben Carter. I stepped away from the sleeping boy, walking into the cold, silent dining room, the ghost of the feast surrounding me. I flipped the phone open. Ben, I said, my voice low. Owen. His voice came through crisp, professional, and blessedly calm. It's done. All of it, I asked. All of it, he confirmed. The Thanksgiving package is fully executed. The revocation of the McKinley Valor Trust was filed electronically with the bank's legal department at 7:03 p.m. All capital has been reverted to the primary holding account. Their access is gone. Good, I said. The lease on the BMW 7 Series, which was held by McKinley Holdings, has been terminated for breach of use. The repossession team I had on standby confirmed they secured the vehicle at 7:20 p.m. It's already on its way to our corporate impound lot. And the house? I've already faxed the preliminary eviction notice to the local sheriff's department, citing the emergency clause, the presence of an unapproved non-familial tenant, Sabrina, and the clear and present danger to a minor Leo. But that's just a formality at this point, since they've already vacated. The property is yours, free and clear. He paused. I could hear him shuffling papers on his end. So, he said, his voice shifting from executor to friend. The board is clear. You did it, Owen. What's the next move? I looked through the archway into the living room. I saw Leo asleep in the chair, his face finally relaxed, no longer pinched with fear or cold. I saw the small healing scratch on his cheek where Sabrina had grabbed him. I thought about the years of silent fear he must have lived through. I thought about the casual cruelty of leaving him to freeze. This was never just about the money. The money was just the tool. The money was the leverage to fix the real problem. The next move, Ben, I said, my voice hardening, is permanent. Define permanent, he said. I want you to prepare the paperwork. First thing Monday morning, we are filing for full, sole, and permanent legal custody of my grandson, Leo McKinley. There was a brief silence on Ben's end. That will be a fight, Owen. Patrick is still his father. I know, I said. Which brings me to the second item. I want you to start an investigation, a real one. I want you to hire the best private investigators you can find. I want you to find out everything Patrick and Sabrina have done to this boy since they got married. What happened tonight, leaving him outside in 15-degree weather, that wasn't just a punishment, Ben. That was child abuse. That was criminal negligence. I stared at the cold, half-eaten turkey on the table. I don't just want to protect Leo, I said, my voice as cold as the room. I want to know if Patrick and Sabrina can be criminally prosecuted. I want you to find everything. I want to make sure," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, "that they can never ever get near this boy again." The battle for Leo was not a battle. It was an execution. But Patrick and Sabrina, now truly bankrupt and utterly desperate, had one last pathetic card to play, the victim card. We were in family court 3 weeks later. They looked diminished. Patrick was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit I had never seen before, probably bought at a thrift store. Sabrina was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, all the fire and venom gone from her eyes, replaced by a dull, sullen resentment. They had a public defender, a young, overworked man who clearly saw this case as a stepping stone, and his strategy was not to defend them. It was to attack me. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice ringing with false righteousness, "we are not here today to discuss a simple custody arrangement. We are here to discuss a 40-year history of systematic emotional and financial abuse." I sat perfectly still. Ben Carter next to me didn't even flinch. "This man," the lawyer continued, pointing a dramatic finger at me, "Mr. Owen McKinley is not a concerned grandfather. He is a manipulator. He is a puppet master of the cruelest kind." I could feel the jury, a panel of 3 in family court, watching me. "For 4 decades, the lawyer boomed, he perpetrated a monstrous lie. He allowed his own son, my client, Mr. Patrick McKinley, to believe he was a simple, struggling, middle-class man. He watched his son build a life, a marriage, and then on a whim on Thanksgiving Day, he decided to pull the strings." Patrick, on cue, put his head in his hands and started to sob quietly. Sabrina just stared at her lawyer, her face blank. "He didn't rescue Leo," the lawyer continued. "He abducted him. He used a minor family disagreement as an excuse to unleash a pre-planned, vindictive financial assault on his own family. He bankrupted his son. He repossessed his daughter-in-law's car. He threw them out of their home, all to gain leverage in this very courtroom. Your Honor, this man did not save a child. He bought one using his billions as a weapon. He is a controlling, deceitful, and vindictive man, and he is not fit to raise a child." The lawyer sat down. The accusation hung in the air. Manipulator. Liar. Kidnapper. I didn't feel angry. I felt cold. This was their final move. Not to prove they were good parents, but to prove I was a bad man. It was a good performance. But Ben and I had been preparing for this. We weren't here to fight about my character. We were here to present the facts. And I knew our facts were better than his fiction. Ben Carter stood up slowly. He was not a flashy man. He was methodical, precise, and he radiated a quiet, unshakable authority. He buttoned his simple gray suit jacket and walked to the podium. He did not look at Patrick or Sabrina. He did not look at their lawyer. He looked directly at the judge.